Back to the casting here. Your question was what?
When you're swinging the pendulum up in front of you,
Yep.
like that, you said you pull down and you load the reel as the pendulum is moving forward.
Absolutely, yeah. So
And you never take your fingers off of it?
if your fingers fall off it, that's okay. The thing you don't want to do is
Just
do
let
this
it
and let
roll.
go because it will stop it.
Right.
But if you keep your hand as a guide there, and I never brought that behind me. I'm only using the momentum here. So it comes back towards me. As it's going forward, I pull.
But you really have to load it or just kind of lightly?
Whatever you're comfortable with. I mean, most of the time, I don't know what you guys would guess that is. What is that, 50 feet away to the wall? About that? So if I'm trying to just get 50 feet, I'm just going to lightly do it. I'm already right here. You guys look. I'm already, this is a 13-foot rod, so I'm about 12 foot down from the tip of my rod to the float. So I'm already, if I just cast it and drop it, I'm 12 foot. So to get that extra distance, 50 foot, no problem. Now if I'm trying to get a really long cast, let's say 50-yard cast or 100-yard cast or something, typically when you're doing that, you're using a really large float, right? So you're going to be using a 21 gram, 15 gram, 1 ounce float or something. You could do this cast called a BC swing cast, and there's two different ways you can do that. You can come off to the side here, and that was one thing I didn't talk about was handle lengths. Depending on what type of cast you're planning on doing mostly will really depend on what handle style you want to get. But when you're picking out a rod with a certain handle setup, you don't want to find something that's too long. If you find something that's too long here, what ends up happening is you can't move the rod around your body. Like you can't come across this way or come across over your shoulder. You have this weird angle that's always sticking in your jacket and stuff like that. Yeah, you could get more leverage because you could put it in your armpit and drift or whatever, but really, if your rod's balanced anyways, having it right at the back of your elbow, you're right here, and you have a lot of setting power when you do that. So you really want to try to find my typical measurements for me. I don't have really long arms, but even though my hoodie's like 3 inches shorter than my arms here because my mom washed my hoodie. But besides that, yeah, I don't have real long arms. So I always like a 10-inch rear grip and a 6-inch or 7-inch foregrip. If you like to grab onto the blank a lot and you don't happen to have a wrap here, these decorative wraps on the front of the rods are typically so you can grab the rod here and the blank's protected. If you grab the rod here, you're putting an angle there that isn't supported by a guide, and you're really stressing the blank. And I've seen people break the rods by grabbing the blank here. So I would say to stay away from that. The longer forward handles, like the guys in BC, they typically like the exact opposite of what guys in the US like. They like a 6-inch rear grip, and they like a 10-inch or 11-inch foregrip. That gives them the ability, let's say that this is the top of the grip here, that gives them the ability to grab the grip and fight the fish. And it also, since they're mostly BC casting, holding it down here and using 2 hands, swinging it like a bait caster, that's a really good length for them. So I'll get back to if I'm wanting to cast really super far, if I'm wanting to do a 50-yard cast or something with a heavy float. Typically my favorite cast is the cross body cast because I have all this rod movement plus I have that same momentum of the bobber that I have with this underhand cast right here. So you have this whole movement of coming across your body. The room yesterday was so nice I didn't have to worry about the ceiling. But yeah, the crossbody anyways, you're here, and you're coming across, and you can get lots of distance really, really easily with that. And what was I just calling that cast? Geez, too early in the morning. But overhand wallis cast, you're only bringing the rod from here to here, so you don't have as much load to that. Of course, if you're fishing in a boat and there's a guy here and a guy there, it does help to know that other cast because sometimes you can't come this way. So I really suggest to guys, this is a more difficult cast, but it really is a stuff we do around here. This one where you're keeping the rod in front of you, right here, this is the best cast that you're gonna be able to get. I mean, that one is the most helpful. A BC cast, or a swing cast, what they do is they fish it just like a bait caster. Now I'm gonna have a really tough time doing this because I only have 4 grams of weight or 3 grams of weight on this float. But the whole idea behind that is to get your timing right, where you're getting the load of the rod, and the rod does a little bit of the slingshot for you, plus the reel is spinning and throwing the float out for you. So I'll try to do one of those. These ones you don't need to let as much line out when you do them. You're pretty much just holding this just like you keep your thumb on a bait caster for a cast. And you're coming back, and I'm gonna come this way, guys. Don't worry, I'm not gonna hit you. I'm gonna catch right over your head, all right? So when I'm coming this way, so I'm right here. So typically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come back. I'm gonna take my finger off the reel, get my timing right. You're good. I always fish around people, so don't worry. I'm not gonna take your eye out. This one's hard to show you without being able to. And you can see the advantage to doing the other cast because, as you can see, I mean, I guess this is a 12-foot ceiling and this is a 13-foot rod, but that cross body cast, this one here, this one's a little easier, but I get my reel spinning, I come across, and that's how you do that. That one's pretty simple, but you need a lot of weight to do that cast really effectively. To get that 50 yards, it really helps to have a lot more weight on there. You guys got any other questions before I move on to something else? You want to talk about float choices, hook choices, bait choices, jigs, beads, anything specific? Eggs?
At the end of your cast, when you're stopping the reel, which finger are you using?
Let's see. I pretty much always use my my ring finger most of the time. So that's the reel that stops it here. When I come forward, ring finger again. And when you're slowing the reel down at the very end, like, you talk about this tapered split shot pattern and why you like to, it's called an accelerated shot pattern, and why you like to move from the heaviest right under the bobber to the lightest all the way down by the bait. And the reason you want to do that is when you're drifting, the point of least resistance is that smallest shot. So you're drifting like this and you're trotting your bobber back, and the bait is way out in front of everything, so you're drifting like this. It's the same thing with your cast. When you're casting and you're slowing that cast down, what's going to happen is everything is going to land in a nice line like this on top of the water. If you have, if you're fishing a jig, for example, and I see a lot of people do this, they just use a weighted bobber and a jig, and the jig is enough weight to get it down in the zone for a steelhead. But even when I'm fishing a jig, and that's true, the jig is heavy enough to get down, I still like to run the shot all the way down the line. I don't like the split shot to be as close to the bait. I like it further off, closer to the bobber. And the difference, so if I was gonna fish, let's say a bead or an egg sack or something like that, I would have a taper more like this, right? So I'd have a couple split shot right below the float, and then I would have the split shots tapering smaller, and then I'd have a barrel swivel right here. However, with a jig, I would kind of run more weight. I'd do it the opposite way. I'd run more weight up towards my bobber, and I'd keep them in a little tighter. They'd still go all the way down my line, but there would be more spread out closer to the float. So it'd be more like that. So I still have them running all the way down. The reason I do that when I'm jig fishing is because if you have all your weight down here and you have all your weight up here, you're going to get this boomerang effect, and it's going to wrap around the tip of your bobber like that, and you're going to be drifting and not even knowing, and you're going to spend 5 minutes on this beautiful drift, and then all of a sudden you reel it in and you realize you were wrapped around the top of the bobber, so you just wasted all that time on that drift.
Do you only put shot on the main line, or do you put it on your leader also?
I put it on my leader also. I was going to rig one up. I didn't have my split shot to rig up yesterday because the box was in my waders. That was another thing I wanted to bring up, a good little tip. Typically, let's just say that this hoodie, let's say, is my wader pocket. So I always like to have two of these because they're so important, right? Like the other day I went out and it was raining real hard, so I took, this is normally what stays in my wader pocket is I got my fluorocarbon, and my fluorocarbon choice nowadays, I really like the Blood Run 6 and 8 pounds, really great stuff. You're trying to find a fluorocarbon that is really abrasion resistant, but you want to try to find a fluorocarbon that's also really supple. You don't want something too stiff. If your fluorocarbon's too stiff, then you're not going to get a lot of bait action and stuff like that. And if it's too stretchy and too soft, when you have these faster action center pin rods, you're going to snap a lot on a lot of hook sets. So I can't tell you how important it is to try to find a fluoro that's nice and supple, that you're able to catch a lot of fish, and your bait's got a really good presentation. So I went out the other day and it was raining, and I always have fluorocarbon and my terminal box in my center pocket because most of the time I'm putting new rigs on because all my shots on my main line, so I'm not really breaking my main line, but I'm always putting on new leaders and I'm always putting on hooks and really small split shot. So in my terminal tackle box I have my 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 size hooks. I got my my little barrel swivels here. I got my float tubing, and I have some of my split shot right here. So I'm always putting split shot on my leader, so I have the smallest split shot, smaller than anywhere on my main line, right down here. So that way that split shot is always going to be the lightest spot on your line as you're drifting. So the other day it was raining and I took this stuff out. I got a new Sims G4 jacket, and they have this really cool techie pocket right here. So I put in the box here, and I put my leader in, and all day when it was raining, I didn't have to unzipper my jacket and go into my wader pocket. However, when I brought my stuff home to dry out and I hung it up, I grabbed my other jacket the next day when it wasn't raining, and I get out there and I unzip my wader pocket, and I got no terminal tackle, and I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Thank God I have a backup one, so I can't tell you how important it is. Even if you don't fill it up the same, make sure you have 2 boxes. Even if you drop one in the river or anything like that, it could end your day really quick. So I like to bring 2 of them with me, and I like to have multiple spools of fluorocarbon because you can't really see inside the spool and you never know when you're going to run out. So bring a few of these with you too. I usually like to have anywhere from 4, 5, 6, and 8, sometimes 10 and 12, depending on what pound mainline I'm using and depending on how big the fish are and the conditions and stuff like that. Typically down at the Niagara, I like running 8 and 10, and typically on the Erie trips, I like running 5 and 6. My shot box looks like this. It's a single individual compartment. I have SSG, which is 1.6. I have AAA, which is 0.8. I have AB, which is 0.6. BB is 0.4. BB1 is 0.3. And number 4 is 0.2. So I like to have all those different sizes, so like I said, my bait gets that nice angled presentation, and as I'm trotting my bobber, which is putting resistance on the reel as it's spinning, the bait is really hanging in front of everything. Not only does it stay in front of all your other stuff on your main line, but it's you're able to slow it down at the sweet spots in the current to present the bait in the fish's face longer. But you're also able to use the same length leader from your bobber to your hook for most of any run. So what I mean by that is if let's say you're fishing a 5-foot hole, okay? Let's just say that this is 5 foot deep right here. When you start drifting this, you have your typical hole, which it's 5 foot deep, and then it's going to shallow up to 3 foot at the end. Well, normally you'd have to adjust this where you're effectively fishing the tail out at 3 foot. You'd have to slide this down to do that. With a center pin and trotting, when you're drifting, all you have to really do is just slow your reel down, and you're able to bring that bait up. And the more pressure you put on that, the more it's going to rise up. So if there's boulders or if there's high spots in the drift or anything like that, just by slowing down your bobber, you're able to bring your bait up and down and really get it in the zone a lot easier. So I really like that accelerated shot pattern is really important, in my opinion. I'll show you guys some floats and some jigs here. So this is my float box right here. I typically like a square box. I've just had this for 20 years and it has a lot of sentimental value to me. A friend gave it to me, so. But I usually keep a bunch of different floats with me. I like sizes from 4 grams up to 15 grams because I never know if I'm going to go to a small little ditch in Ontario or if I'm going to go to the Niagara River. I always like to have a whole bunch of different sizes with me. The style of float I like is a typical loafer. What makes this float a loafer is you have this nice, pretty sharp taper going all the way down. They get really skinny. They typically have a long stem. I like running the balsa floats more than I like running the Drennens and the plastic floats because these all take the same size tubing. So you can switch from a 10 to a 4 to a 6 to an 8 really easily just by removing these. With the other types of floats, you need different size tubings for the top and bottom. Makes it difficult to use. One little tip I will say is if you do want to go to a Drennen like a clear float, they have a really thick top. You could typically take one of the tubings for the top, run it up your main line. You could put it over the hook, slide it up your leader, up your main line, over the shot, and replace, you go through your bottom tubing and you can replace it. You can run other floats using this tubing, but it really is easier if all your bobbers have the same size top all the way through it. And the other reason I like loafers as well is that these are really good for a lot of different reasons. Number one, they hold their place really well in the current, so when you're drifting, there isn't a lot of drag coming forward. It really holds itself well. That's why I like the longer stems. It doesn't cast as big of a shadow as a wider top, and it also doesn't disturb as much surface water either. And there also isn't as much surface tension that the float has to break when the fish grabs the float. So I'm really on my float. I trot it a lot. I really like to have that strong connection where I'm not disrupting the surface current a lot. There's a lot of different manufacturers. I like custom bobbers. I like Superiors and Hero Drifters. Blood Run has some really great loafers. They're really affordable. They're only $6 and it's the same exact shape. It's not as fancy looking, but they do hold up good for the $6 that they cost. Anything else you guys want to talk about while I'm here?
That loafer style float will allow you to stay in that drift better too.
It
right?
will,
Not
yeah.
just
As you
racing.
mend your line, it really keeps its place because there isn't as much drag. And the other thing I end up doing a lot too, this was an important thing that a lot of guys were surprised with yesterday, is when I'm drifting my float, there's some things I like to do to make sure that I get the most optimal trot. And I'll explain that to you guys in a second. Take that back and I'm gonna upload that one.